You'll count to 20.
All right, it appears we have a quorum. I'll call the meeting to order at 7:03 p.m. on May the 18th, 2020. Before we move on to the agenda items, I want to thank everybody for being here at the airport board meeting. You'll notice on the agenda, there's not any action items with the exclusion of the correction or approval of the minutes. So this is really more of an update type of meeting, and also to let the board have some input on the CARES Act funding. So with that, I will begin with the first item, correction or approval of minutes, regular meeting, April 20th, 2020. If there are no corrections, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to accept those minutes as written.
I'll second the motion.
We'll do a voice vote. McKay,
Aye.
Roden,
Yes.
Bogle,
Yes.
Francis,
Yes.
and Stiles.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to the chairman's report, the second item on the agenda. First, I would like to welcome James Stiles to the board. Look forward to working with you over the next 3 years.
Thank you very much.
This board has, over the last year, set a pretty good foundation of meeting regularly and improving the city's relationship with the flying members out there. And so I think with your appointment, it'll be a big benefit to continuing improvements out to the airport.
Look forward to being part of that.
Thank you. Got a couple items to report on here. The PAPI project, we did conduct a final inspection on April 7th. After that meeting and after that inspection, we did develop a punch list with a few minor things to correct. The main correction that we were a little hesitant about to getting corrected quickly was removing some trees and shrubs that were likely or are likely in the side view of the PAPIs that were just installed. We've reached out to the Corps to allow us to, or allowed the contractor to remove those trees. There's really 3, and the Corps has given us their blessing to go ahead and remove those. So that was kind of the biggest item. Other things, we're putting tags on some of the electrical equipment so it was easily identified in the future, and then some sodding issues that they'll correct. One thing that did come up as we were testing the PAPIs to see if they were functioning was the switch that's located in the vault seemed to be malfunctioning to some degree. So we've asked the contractor to go in and investigate kind of what the issues might be. Now, this is not in their contract to fix anything, but since they're out there, since they're professional electricians, we'd like to get their thoughts on how we can correct those issues. It doesn't seem like a major item, but we need to know, we need to know and have assurance that those PAPIs can be turned on and off when we need them. And the last note on the PAPI project is the flight check is planned to be at the end of the month, the last week of this month. So in 2 weeks, there should be a flight check scheduled. And those, after the flight check, if everything checks out, they should commission those, and hopefully they can commission those fairly quickly after that flight check. So I'll keep the board apprised of that, and let the flying club individuals know that as well. Last week, I got to sit down with the flying club president, Mr. James Stiles, and the secretary, and we discussed kind of the transition process going from higher responsibilities for the city, particularly through the flying club's budgeted expenses. And so the flying club, their intent is to most likely reduce some of their annual fees that they have for their members, and that's in relation to our lease agreement. So we'll be taking on some of those duties that the Flying Club had been taking on themselves, and really paying for those duties through their club membership. Mainly it's utility bills, trash bills, that kind of thing that will be paid for through the lease agreement. And the Flying Club will no longer be responsible for that duty. And James, I'll kind of throw that back at you. If you'd like to add anything about our discussions that we had last week, I'd be happy to hear them, and I think the board would as well.
Well, our meeting was quite lengthy. I mean, a lot was discussed. There was a lot to be discussed. And I certainly appreciate you reaching out to me and getting the meeting set up. That's what needed to happen. And unfortunately, with my schedule out there, sometimes I just get so involved in work that, I forget to look at the horizon and see what needs to be done. So thank you very much. Anyway, it was good that our Secretary of Treasury could be there as well. She had some good comments and questions, and overall, I think a lot of good information was shared. And the Wagoner Flying Club and its board members, at least the two of us right now, as soon as I get this information, I'll in a paper format, I'll disseminate it to the other board members of the club. We know where we're going to go. We know how we're going to operate. We know how the city's going to operate. Of course, there's always going to be questions, but I feel with the relationship that the Wagoner Flying Club board has now with the city officials and the people on the airport board, I think there won't be anything that we can't tackle.
Thank you for that, James. And any transition like this is going to be, there are going to be hiccups, no question. But I think if we can, the city and the Flying Club can just work together with it and be communicating on a regular basis, any issues that we see on both ends, to kind of squash any little fires that may come up, we'll be able to get through it. So thank you, James, and I appreciate the meeting. The last comment, last comment that I'll make is I have begun contacting some hangar owners about the lease, and in fact, I've got tomorrow kind of blocked off in the morning to finish contacting all of the hangar owners as best I can. I'm having a little bit of trouble of keeping notes with about 40 individuals that I've got to contact, making notes on whether I was able to contact them, whether I need to send them an email. So I did ask James to send me over a spreadsheet that they've got that will hopefully help my job a little bit easier, or make it a little bit easier in documenting.
I just sent that.
Thank you, James. With that, that's all for the chairman's report. I will open it for any questions that I have from the board. I believe Josh and MT are muted at this point. So if they've got any questions.
Could I ask a question, Taylor?
Sure. Yes.
Okay, on the PAPIs, you said there's an FAA flight check that's going to be conducted, of course. Has the contractor already done a preliminary aiming of those? Or is it going to take a flight test and then go out and re-aim it and then another flight test?
Yeah, that's a good question. My understanding is that the contractor should have it set up and the flight test should check out. If the contractor has not set that up correctly, then they would actually be responsible for doing another flight check.
Okay, good.
So it's really on their backs. They should, and actually, since we had the mayor on the line here, he can maybe chime in on some of this stuff. But the surveyors that have gone out there at the beginning of this should have given the right angles for the PAPIs to be, the right locations, the right heights. So the contractor should be following those guidelines, and they should work.
Okay,
on
sounds
the first
good.
flight check. Mayor,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. I'm not the surveyor on this job, of course, but have done a lot of airports, and the PAPI lights, they're in the construction plans. We have angles, and bear with me, sorry. That being said, is they should have the information. So once they're set in stone, then they'll do the flyby like Mr. Tannehill said, or the fly check, and they should check out correct. If not, they'll always go back to the surveyor. That's where the liability gets passed, always. But that is correct.
One other question, if I may, Taylor.
Yes.
Were there any spare parts, in particular bulbs, that may be required or may have been a part of the contract in the supply of those PAPIs? Or
I
is it
would
something that we're,
I would have to double check that. I don't believe, I think what we purchased for this project was solely for what's out there right now. So there was no backup bulbs or anything, but I can confirm that and get with you tomorrow on that.
okay, and the contractor will provide to you or the city, probably through you, all the necessary paperwork for the equipment that's installed as far as the type, model, make, and all that stuff. So that when we have to go do something to it, like change a bulb, that we have the means for identifying what is going to be required.
Yes, and in fact, this was a bit of a unique situation, since there's really like one manufacturer of these PAPI lights, and that allowed us to purchase the equipment outright. So we actually made the purchase of the equipment, and the contractor didn't.
Okay.
So we already
Okay.
have all that information and the manufacturer materials and everything. So we have that in our hands. We don't need to contact the contractor on that. So we
Very
are
good.
good on that.
Thank you
But
very much.
I'll get a confirmation on replacement bulbs. If my memory serves me, I don't believe we have replacement bulbs, but given that, I think the next discussion item, we can talk about purchasing replacement bulbs for the PAPI lights. Are any other questions from the board members?
No questions here.
None here.
No.
I'm here.
All right. I will move on to item number 3, discussion, use of CARES Act airport funding. So last month, I did give you guys kind of an update on what the CARES Act provided for municipal airports. We are eligible to receive $30,000 from the CARES Act. This is through a grant process with the FAA. I have submitted paperwork to start the process to get those funds. The intent of the CARES Act was for operational purposes, but for capital projects, they do have to be, they can be approved, and the CARES Act funding can be approved for capital projects, but it goes through a much more lengthy process. And my conversation with the FAA have been that they're setting on cash. They want to get the cash out to the airports as quick as possible. They'd rather not fiddle around with capital projects and really get the money to the airports for operational purposes. With that being said, I did last month want to give the board an opportunity to have a discussion about the use of those funds. There are a number of things that the money can be used for, and I think for the short term, we'll be able to purchase some equipment, upgrade some equipment without dipping into that capital projects type of thing. So with that being said, I gave you guys some homework last month, and I'd like to hear your thoughts before I get into mine. So I'll let the board take a stab at it.
My input would simply be, this is a great opportunity. And if we could just focus on higher risk areas like electrical and any undone lighting. Maybe if there are some particular bad spots in the taxiway where a patch would be appropriate. That would be my input.
I had a question, and I don't really know whether it falls into operational or whether it would be capital, but that would be, what about this fueling station thing we've discussed before?
Capital.
Capital, I was afraid of that.
Unfortunately. I
Yeah,
think, right,
okay.
Taylor? Is that right?
Well, I did not pose that question directly to the FAA about getting the card reader out there. And I think that's kind of what, that's our limitation at this point. So I don't know if that would be a capital expense since there's not one out there. It probably would be. If it was a replacement of an existing one, it would be operational. That's
Yeah.
the way they view it.
Yeah.
And so since it's an upstart, so to speak,
capital,
they would be seeing that as a capital improvement
Sure.
project. And the way they defined, at least when in my conversation with them, the way they defined a capital project is anything on their AIP list. And the AIP is the list that they kind of run down on these larger grants that we apply for. So it's that everything in the capital improvements plan that this board's approved. It's the taxiway rehab. It's the fencing around the perimeter. It's terminal buildings. It's all those things. And one item that was brought to my attention was a beacon light, which I think is really important. That needs to be replaced. And that was a specific question I had for the FAA. And they said the beacon light's on AIP. It's a capital project, but get creative with the way that the money is used and spent, and you can possibly get these smaller capital projects done without using CARES Act funding. And so, and that came directly from the FAA. It came directly in a webinar that I had in the CARES Act. Essentially, it's using the already budgeted funds that you would use for operational expenses and replenishing that with the CARES Act. And that's kind of the idea of where I think we're going to go with most of the funding, particularly the beacon light.
And the rotating beacon is just a natural progression logically after what's been done with the PAPIs and the runway lighting system. So it's no one could ever debate the priority. So
Agreed.
Yeah, and anything safety wise, I'm going to put that as a priority. I'm not a flyer, so I don't fully understand the importance of some of these things. But if it has to do with safety, I'm all for putting that in the priority. That's why I was really happy to see the PAPI lights move up in our CIP because they were just not functioning. And we had a access road project that needs to be completed, but that has minimal impact on safety out for the flyers. So that I'm going to put safety over as priority anytime. Do we have any other suggestions about the use of the CARES Act? If not, I'll kind of give my 2 cents about the use of those funds.
My thoughts, Taylor, were just the card reader, but I don't kind of like Vicky and MT had said, maybe a capital project that we don't use those funds for. So that was the only thing that stuck out in my mind.
Sure.
but if you can figure it out, it's great.
Yeah. I'm going to explore that a little bit further and see where our funds shake out with the beacons, the beacon light there. And so since our funds are limited to operational expenses and our transition process with the flying club, we will be spending, as soon as the funds are received, we will be spending those funds. We'll just move the CARES Act funds into our operational budget for the next fiscal year. So that's going to pay for the electric bill, the trash service, the water service, the water bill, and a couple other kind of minor items. And if you think about it, 30 grand and the budget we have out there, that's going to last a long time in our operations. I mean, it really will. These funds don't expire. So I'm going to pursue the CARES Act for those operational expenses. And then with these other items like the beacon light, the card reader, I'm going to ask the council to take a look at using what we've continued to budget in the past, but to use those funds for these improvements that we need to make. And so that's kind of the route that I think we can use the CARES Act funding in the appropriate way, but also make the improvements that are needed at the airport when it comes to safety and maybe even a revenue producing side of it with the card reader. So that's really kind of where I set with it. I would like to make some minor improvements to the pilot's lounge out there. I don't know how many of the board members have visited that, the pilot's lounge. It needs a little love, needs a little care, maybe some new carpet. When we do have construction projects out there, we like to meet out there in the wintertime. The heater does not that functional. Like to have some heat in the pilot's lounge, maybe some air as well. We do have, and I should have mentioned this in my chairman's report, but this week the roof is scheduled to be replaced. And so we budgeted that this year in our budget. When these CARES Act funds come in, we can use those funds to pay for those improvements on the roof. So, that's another way that the funds that were budgeted can carry over to next year, and the $1,500 that was budgeted can be used for something else. Hopefully that'll be the case. So I know I didn't give too many specifics on the use of the CARES Act, but I just kind of wanted to give the board a general idea of how they can be used and what they can be used for. Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Hey.
I actually have a question. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, you.
You want me to go?
Fencing, safety fencing requirements. Sorry, Mr. Bogle, I didn't know who was talking. Mine's about
No,
fencing.
go ahead.
So the fencing, that question, again, that is a part of the AIP. So it's going to be one of those funding structures that would be on the 90-10 grant matching situations.
Okay.
It's going to be a capital project. If we could maybe get creative and say that the barbed wire fence on the west side is existing and it needs to be replaced with an adequate fence to prevent wildlife to cross over. That's possible, but I don't know how far you can get with 30 grand and fencing.
Okay.
It can be used for the gate if there's any malfunctions with the gate or upgrading the gate that we have there. That's possible. But again, I think getting a large project, a large construction project, I guess, that's going to fall into CIP and Mark Kolditz with the FAA, that seemed to leave a bad taste in his mouth when I mentioned anything like that. So.
Okay. My apologies. Thank you, Mr. Bogle.
Nope, thank you for the question.
Taylor, I just now thought about this, but last year when we had the Bluegrass and Chili Festival, we had some people fly in and there was no way for them to get downtown. Could this be used for like a courtesy car?
I think again, this probably doesn't fit the AIP, but we don't have an existing courtesy car. I think that opens up a whole other conversation about finding vehicles that are maybe not necessarily surplus, but need a few repairs here and there that we can service and put it out there. I mean, I don't think it takes a whole lot for us to get that courtesy car available to people. We just got to find a vehicle that we're happy with putting out there, and we can explore what the possibilities are of insurance. How are they going to access the vehicle when they need it? But I mean, I think the short answer is we could possibly use the money to purchase a vehicle. But I'm going to say, let's see what we got. And, it's not a vehicle that's going to be driven every day, 100 miles. It's probably a once a week type of scenario, twice a week, coming into town, buying lunch and driving back. So I'm going to say maybe we can possibly use the CARES Act for repairs of an existing vehicle and see where that takes us. But that's a great idea. I know it's been a topic of the mayor, and I've had that conversation with James and many others about a courtesy car out there. And I think it's a pretty short cost if we have an existing vehicle that's available to get it up and running. And it goes into our economic development. A burger bot with the courtesy car is a burger we wouldn't get otherwise. So it's good to think about those things.
Josh, thanks for bringing that up. That's a great idea. And Taylor, if it comes through, we can, James and I can offer some insight on how people access it and logistics.
Sure.
So no problem there.
Yeah, and a couple other things about when I met with James. I think he had a whole list of items to repair or just maintenance things on the pilot's lounge. Including some sort of key holder there at the pilot's lounge for that. I mean, those are CARES Act funding right there. That a lockbox, for a vehicle key. And possibly even some sort of carport or something to park it under, that might be a possibility as well. So.
Yeah, we
we
definitely need to set up some kind of management of a courtesy car. It would be a great asset, and pilots flying in and passengers flying in, knowing that there's a car available there. That's just what courtesy cars are. They're courtesy. I think that goes a long way in telling people about what an airport, does for a community. But again, as MT and I talked about it before, and others in the club have talked about it before, getting a car out there, that's one thing. But let's not put the cart before the horse. Let's talk about how we manage this, how we allow access to it. And there's a whole lot of things to think about in addition to that, such as what kind of access do we give the pilots and passengers to the pilot's lounge? Right now, it's a kind of well, if you don't know the code, you're not going to be able to get into the door. And the whole idea of a pilot's lounge is to be able to have it available for access to pilots and passengers that fly in. But anyway, as MT said, the logistics and the management aspect of it, let's get that on the agenda at some point and come up with some ideas how best to do that, and then proceed and look for a car and, get it all implemented. And if the CARES Act can fund that, I think that's great.
But we already have access to the building that a pilot should know. It may not be marked well. Right, James? Military emergency frequency?
Yeah. I'll be honest with you, not too many people would know what the military emergency frequency is. I mean, it is 243, The GA emergency frequency is 121.5. And the numbers aren't even marked. So we have some issues there with access, public access to the lounge. And if we want to keep it locked, you know, to afford access only to the pilots and passengers that are flying in, that's fine. I think we probably should. But I'm not sure about the best way to do that. Right now, what we have is a punch key type door handle that there's no markings on it. There's no sign on the outside of the door that gives the pilot or the passengers any information on how to get in. And
Well,
that
there used to
definitely needs to be. I'm sorry.
Well, there used to be, so we can change it. We
Yes.
just throw up a new unicam lock and put blah, blah, blah code, and it's something that I guess even the biggest rum dum pilot would know, and then they'd be able to get in. So,
Yeah, I mean, it might be as simple as, you know, the Unicom frequency, 122.9. Just having a lock assembly that can accept 4 digits, 122.9 or 1229. And even having that published in, you know, websites like AirNav, which ForeFlight and a lot of others get all their information from, it would be out there accessible to the pilots on all kinds of information available to them. And then again, have it on the door, right in immediate view of the pilot, so that, oh, well, let's see, 122.9, that's the frequency we use to get in on. We punch those buttons and boom, we're in.
it's easy.
Okay. Let's explore this further. I may set up a meeting, and Josh, if you're available, set up a meeting to discuss the courtesy car and the management of that. And we'll kind of go through those details and bring something to bring to the board next month on, you know, at least the management portion of it. And then, like you said, James, get that set in place and go shopping for a vehicle, I guess.
Yeah, I think that'd be good. It might be good for us to visit maybe another airport and see how they do it. I don't know if there's any around here that have that kind of a luxury that we could go look at and see how they manage it and just get some pointers from them. I don't know. Maybe you guys that fly a lot, you deal with courtesy cars more often and know, you know, how that would go. But
There's nothing to it. Save your time. They just park the car. If it's an unattended airport, there's a hook inside the building with the keys, or the keys above the visor. So I would not recommend the latter, but if someone has
Thank you.
to the building, and if the key is visible inside the building, if a pilot can't figure that out, he probably shouldn't have your car. So there's, and you just put a note in the car, please put $5 of gas in it or something. Pilots generally manage that process themselves. So usually airport courtesy cars are total dogs. So anything we can do to not be that is great. Now, Muskogee Davis, they've gone over the top, and they have a Tesla as the airport courtesy car, if you can believe that.
You're kidding.
So we just had, you know, a late 90s, early 2000s, mid 2000s 4-door sedan. A lot of communities, the courtesy car is a surplus law enforcement car or something like that. So it's easy. So if you get the car, it's an easy process. And it's
All
a
right.
great idea.
Yeah, no, thank you for all the ideas. I don't want to cut this item short. Is there any other comments or suggestions about the use of the CARES Act or CARES Act funding, or any other items that funding may be used for?
If I can't think of anything right now, but I come up with something later on, I can always send it to you, right?
Absolutely, yes,
Okay.
please do.
All right.
I do have one more question, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Could that money be used for planning? Design?
That's a good question. I'll have to reach out to Mark about
just
that.
curious.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would think generally it could be. It can be used as match for this last year's this PAPI project. So that 10% that we are expending through EDA, we can utilize the CARES Act for that match. And so it may carry over as a match for next year's CIP or next year's project as well, and the following years. So it can't be used for the sole purpose of a capital project, but it can be used for the matching portion of the capital project.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. All right. I'll move on to the item number 4, which is the mayor's report. Mayor Jones.
Oh, yeah. I would like to first welcome Mr. Roden to a 3-year term. Spoke with him, and he was approved by his fellow council members. So welcome back for your new 3-year term. And Mr. Stiles, he was not able to be on the city council meeting because I apparently sent his invitation to the wrong email address. But I'd also like to welcome Mr. Stiles for his 3-year term. We did discuss, before the council meeting agenda was posted, we have a lot of the similar ideals. We want to see our fabulous airport become the greatest airport in 7 counties. And leading up to that, Mr. Tannehill, I'd like to ask maybe if we could have it on our next meeting, if we could have a brainstorming session talking about planning, just listening to everyone talk about how to use this additional new monies. I would really like to have an agenda item, maybe discussion only, where we just threw out everything. There's 19,000 airports just like ours, and how do we make ours stick out for people to come to use our supreme courtesy car and in our secure facility? One of the things on the security car, as we're talking about fencing, is so important to me just because of the security aspect of it. If that pilot's lounge was totally enclosed inside a fence for the airport users only, then that we could easily leave the key above the visor and they could drive it out the gate and we could give them the gate code. But there's just so many possibilities that our airport has, especially having a whole undeveloped western side. And just this newly formed board. And once again, I'd like to commend you on your work that you've done over the past 12, 13 months, getting it to council last month to be approved of. I know this wasn't an easy task by any means. I think it took us 4 years to get to day one of what you guys have done the last 12 years. So I'd like to encourage you guys to stay dedicated to this board and also dedicated to what the future of our airport could be, not just 5 years from now, but 20 years from now, and things that we could do to increase the revenue, of course, but there's other things that are more important than revenue, and that is safety. We want to make sure that anyone that wants to fly into our fair city to do any kind of business, whether it's to buy a burger like Mr. Tannehill said, or to visit James's repair shop or some other business that is on the west side that is yet to be determined. I would just like to have a brainstorming agenda item if we could, just to hear everyone's report, because the things that I've heard is like wildlife in the evenings, dusk landing is kind of scary, and we do not have the appropriate fences, and this is 2020, they manufacture them, so security. I'm not a flyer or a pilot either. I would like to see a pilot school at our airport. Maybe I would get some lessons if I'm not too old. But just things like that would increase the awareness of our airport, and security fencing and a courtesy car also have been top priorities, as you know. So, Mr. Chairman, that concludes it for my report. I would like to end it there if anyone has any specific questions for the mayor.
I have a speech.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Steve.
I'm kidding. I don't have a speech. Welcome, Mr. Stiles. We're glad you're here.
Thank you. I do have a question, and this is maybe a little bit thinking in advance. But if we're going to market the airport and what it can do for the community and the city, and I have not been to the Wagoner, I'm assuming the Wagoner city has a website. Is that correct? Like
Yes,
most.
sir. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the best
Are
around.
we looking at kind of trying to market the airport on that website as well? And when we get some of these things in place, like you've got festivals here and around the area, if people need a ride, being able to set up something where we can have people available that can come out and pick them up. I'm just thinking, you know, we want people to use the airport. We want them to know it's out there and what services are available. And I think putting it on a website and having it on AirNav, I think that's the online format for pilots to get airport information. I think that would be one thing to consider when the time comes, of course.
Absolutely. Mr. Stiles, in my stump speech, when I'm welcoming people or talk to people, you know, I'll say a lot of things like, you know, we have a navigation port. We're the bisection of 2 major highways in Oklahoma. We're also bisected by 2 railroad tracks, shipping tracks, and our 43,000 miles of shoreline and our municipal airport. And everyone always says, you have an airport? So it's the most under
Yeah.
promoted things in this city. And I'm just trying to get it to a point where it's actually accessible to the public and not just necessarily a private little individual group. So I would love people to fly
Absolutely.
in from anywhere and everywhere, just to, you know, stop and see what's going on and safely get through town. And if we do a courtesy car, which, you know, I want a Tesla also, maybe since Elon Musk is possibly moving to Tulsa, maybe
Yeah,
donate
it
us
might
one
be
of
in
his
the
trucks.
cards.
Well, AJ, all due respect, the airport is accessible to the public. I don't know what you mean by that.
No. I don't mean accessible, I mean prominent. A lot of people that live here do not know
Don't even know that it's there, right?
if you don't go to Toppers. Just more well known, like it's not I didn't mean it that way. Not to take any offense to the air guys that are out there. Did not mean it that way. Meant it like you could survey 10 people in town and maybe 30% know we have an airport.
That's
And,
right.
Well, but I hear what you're saying. 2 things. All this talk about people using the airport that are transients is perfect. But to get into what Josh brought up earlier, a card reader where people can buy, other pilots, transient pilots can purchase fuel will be critical to that.
All right.
So I just want to say that. And as far as people in the community not knowing about the airport or being exposed to it, I think the key driver there is a flight instruction vehicle.
Oh, I absolutely agree, Mr. Francis.
So that's one way where people get exposed.
Yeah.
So.
And that is all I guess I'm trying to say is educational. And I know that if you brought someone out there 5 years ago, it's not as impressive as it is today. And I hope that it's a lot more impressive 5 years from now. And just to keep that continual upkeep nicer, you know, every time I've been to the Pilot's Lounge, I would agree. Every project we've ever had has been in the wintertime. It's very cold out there. Sometimes it's warmer outside than it is inside. But I just think of people like Mr. Stiles was sharing with me. Someone came to a high school graduation. You know, not that it's not classy or anything like that, but it would be nice if they had a nice place just to hang out while the guy that they flew in for a graduation is at the graduation.
Agreed.
So they might go tell someone, say, hey, you ever flown into Wagoner? That's a really nice airport. And they give you a courtesy car that's got decals on it that says airport courtesy car. That way, when they pull into a restaurant, we know all of our restaurant people will treat them very nicely because they are visitors and it's set on the side of their car.
I agree. The courtesy car should have decals, magnets, whatever, and, be kind of a head turner, just at least not look terrible.
Yeah, I
Like,
agree with you.
So many airports, it's just an afterthought, so.
Right. So,
Anyway.
so when I said that, if you took any offense, none was intended. It was just, I want to, be very
Well,
proud of our airport, and I
what you
wouldn't,
said
I
is-
want,
Well, I understand what you mean, but what you said is not accessible to the public, and
yes,
that's not
sir.
true.
I'm going to tell you, like, right now, Vicky doesn't feel like it's accessible to the public. She's a non-flyer. I am a non-flyer. Unless I have business out there, there's really no need for me to be out there. So the accessibility is just not there for someone who doesn't need to go see Mr. Stiles from the community. And when I say public, I'm not just talking about the community, MT. I'm talking about the flying public that's in Morris, Oklahoma, that wants to fly to Wagoner and while their stuff's
Well,
getting.
that's actually where I was saying it is accessible to any pilot.
Mhm.
I mean, it's published everywhere, so it has to be. So
No, but
I was just trying to clarify. It's
yeah, I got you. But I have had a few pilots tell me that if we did have a card reader and we did have our gasoline prices, that we would get
Mhm.
more transient traffic. And that's the
they're
vein.
right.
Exactly.
They're right. They are exactly right.
It's and again, we're thinking real forward here. We've had one in the past, MT, and I thought it was a success. We had kind of like an airport community day out there. We had some medevac helicopters fly in. We had the fire department out there. It was an open house for the airport, open house for the community, actually.
Yes.
It's not out of the realm of my interest anyway, of having another one out there at some point to get more exposure of the airport and what it offers to the community. Now, having a flight school out there and having them demonstrate, on this community day like that, I think that'd be great. It's all a part of, getting more exposure and having the community see what they have out there. It worked
Well,
in the past, I thought.
We had 2 or 3 of those in the late 90s. Maybe the most recent one was 2000, and they were spectacular. So,
Yep.
Some components of those were not well done, but if we took the good parts of those and duplicated it, it'd be fantastic. So.
Having fuel, again, very vital. If we get people flying in for this community thing from other airports, it'd be nice to show them that we have fuel available to the public. And again, a card reader, as Josh had mentioned and others had mentioned before, I think ought to be somewhere on the priority list.
Anything else to add, Mayor?
No, I thank you guys for the great questions. So that is all I have, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Yeah, so I do believe we can accommodate that discussion item next month. So everyone bring their ideas. James, we did speak briefly about the community day out there, and I think it's an excellent idea to get going. We can bring, show off the services that the airport provides to the city, and the use of the airport. So excellent ideas. And with that being said, I will turn it over to the 5th item, unscheduled public appearances. I did not receive anything as of noon today about anyone having questions for the board members or myself or anybody else. So we'll move on to item number 6, adjournment, and I'll entertain a motion.
I motion we adjourn.
I'll second.
And we'll do a voice vote. McKay,
Yes.
Roden,
Yes.
Vogel,